So good morning, Jack. How are you today, mate?
I'm really good, man. I'm really good. How are you?
I'm all right, mate. I've been painting in the office just before you come on. So I've been kind of meditating with the old paintbrush and that relaxes me. I will say, mate, the viewers can't see you, but you're looking really cool today, mate.
Thank you very much. I try very hard every day.
So, Jack, we'll get on to what you do now a little bit later on, but I always like to wind it all the way back to the beginning, from your childhood, where it all begins. So are you comfortable telling me about that?
100%, man. Yeah. So I was born in the Wirral, which for people that aren't from the Wirral, it's kind of next door to Liverpool. Wherever I go, I just tell people I'm from Liverpool because it's easier. Um, and I am the oldest sibling, the golden child out of the three of us. Um, and to a I went to a nice little primary school, um, and had a very lovely, I'd say, very lovely family experience for the first 7-8 years of my life. And Unfortunately, after that, my mum became quite unwell, and so things things kind of shifted overnight. And She's doing a lot better now, which is brilliant. And My family are all absolutely wonderful people, but it was a very hard thing to try and digest as someone that was like 7-8 years old, because I couldn't really comprehend it. And it's only actually been through therapy much later on that I've kind of really experienced those memories. And to be honest, it's not something I've talked to my family about a great deal, just because I find it quite hard. Then I went to high school down the road, kind of the classic British. It's pretty rubbish high school, but everyone kind of just gets on with it. And I was so I know before we started this call, you said, "Oh, I looked about 7 years younger than I am." When I was in high school, mate, I up until I was 17, I swear to God, I looked 12 years old. I had like a shaved head, and I looked like a little peanut, like to the point where I couldn't get into countries because of my passport a few years ago till they changed it. And I found it really hard to kind of fit in with any group of people that all were doing like adult things, like going out drinking and like meeting people and getting in relationships. None of that happened for me. Um, and then when I started college at 16, I my appearance again. It's one of those things that it changed really quickly, and then started getting a lot of attention from girls, and then I started drinking at pretty much the same time. And I distinctly remember one day in college walking down the hallway being like, "Oh, I used to feel really terrible all the time, and now I'm feeling really confident." And I think that link from 16 to everything's great at the same time as I started drinking, coincidence or not, was where all of that started. Um, and then I did really well in my school, even though I think, but by 18, I was pretty much functioning alcoholic, I'd say, which is not something people would. It's not something people think is real. You know what I mean? Like even me saying this now in the back of my mind, someone that's older might be listening, thinking that you can't be an alcoholic at 18, or you can't be. And I think it's an absolute myth. It's just it's not recognized, because if everyone else is partying around you, it doesn't make a difference if you're, oh, like, I'll have a few more. Everyone's like, oh, they're a bit mad. It's never that. Like, I think if you're drinking on your own in secret when you're 18, there's a problem. Which is something I used to do. And I used to cut out school early to go to my friend's house around the corner, and we just get drunk all afternoon. And I think because I'd had such a kind of self-imposed strict kind of like, I'm going to smash out all my schoolwork from year 7 to year 11, that I'd excelled to the point where I didn't have to try anymore. And I know that seems like maybe even like a mildly kind of cocky thing to say, but it was true. Then when I was 17, my teacher in high school, my music teacher, went to prison. and I couldn't afford, well, the school couldn't afford to get a new teacher in, so I had to teach myself my my A-level music, and the stress of that kind of made me like drink more. But I did all right, and then I moved out when I was 19, and I pretty much didn't. There wasn't every other day I was drinking up until when I stopped drinking. Pretty much after that. So I mean, surmising it in 5 minutes makes it seem really bleak. I mean, I had a really great time, like for a long time. I think the hardest part about any of this stuff has been stopping drinking, because it was just wicked until I stopped. I'm not gonna pretend it wasn't. There was so many there's so many. I feel like I stopped drinking at a relatively early age. Simply, one of the reasons is I've got so many stupid stories, as I'm sure that you do, and anyone else that has any kind of substance problem, that they can carry them for the rest of their lives. So even if you're sat around talking to people who are like, "Oh, I was out on the smash last week, and this and this and this happened," those stories aren't really not really exciting and stuff to me anymore, because I'm like, oh, I did that so consistently that I don't ever need to create another one of those stories for the rest of my life, and I'll still have, you know, so much to talk about at like parties and all those things. So yeah, that led me up to I stopped when I was 26. So
Before we go into that, so when you say you started drinking at 16 and you changed your image, that seemed to give you a bit of confidence. Then you started drinking, which gave you even more confidence. What was your drinking like then at 16, and how did it change when you got to 18? Because you said that you was like a functioning alcoholic, that in 2 years, that's moved on quite dramatically, isn't it?
yeah, I think the main problem is that I'd never touched alcohol until I was 16. So I didn't really know how to navigate it. So from 16, I would say that two started off just being like 2 days a week. I would go and stay with friends. I didn't want to worry my family with getting home late or any of those things. I couldn't really be bothered with the hassle of it. So I would just kind of like pick out friends to go and stay with in order for me to be able to get really drunk and not have to go back and see them drunk, you know, because I was just pretending I wasn't drinking, you know, like if they're listening to this will be the first time they've heard about this, like, sorry. And so I would drink, it was really, the combination was, it'll knock you sick. It was when I was 16, I was drinking a crate of Budweiser and a bottle of Bailey's. Me and my friend would get his mum to go to the shop for us. And we'd do like stuff around the house, and then she'd just pick up the booze for us. And so I would have like, yeah, I drink like a crate of Budweiser and then a bottle of Bailey's, and I did that for probably about 6 months or stuff. Yeah, about 6 months or so. And then I started, and then I started seeing this girl who lived on this estate, and because she'd been kicked out of her house by her family, so she had free reign on her house. And obviously, looking back at that, you're like, oh, you poor kid, like you're 16, you're living on your own. When we were 16, it was like, that's a free house, you know. So
Yeah.
like that's when I started drinking like Jack Daniels and stuff, and I just made me feel like, I mean, I was listening to like Guns N' Roses and Motley Crue and stuff, and I was just like, yeah, if you've got a bottle of Jack Daniels in your hand, you're the fucking man, you know. And from there, when I kind of like, I realized those people weren't really the people that I wanted to be hanging around with, I kind of like pulled it back a little bit, because my music started to become a bit more serious. But at 17, when the music started to become more serious, I had to become more efficient with my drinking. So how it shifted was that I would figure out ways to get to different venues just in Liverpool, without having to drive, so that someone else could kind of like pick up the slack at the end and I could drink. And I had like a system in place of what I would drink before I went on stage to feel a certain way. So I would have I'd have 6 cans of whatever lager was kicking around, and then 2 energy drinks, and I'd have those before I went on stage, and then have a couple whilst I was on stage, and then I'd go back to my friend's house and have I think it's very specific. It's very important for people to know the specifics of it because it makes it seem more serious. Because me picking out these numbers in my head, I'm just like, it makes me feel a bit sick because I've never up until this second thought about the amount. So then I'd go back to my friend's house and I'd have like another like 8 cans or so. And then the next day, again, because I'm doing music, I don't have to be up until whatever time the next afternoon. So I just sack off college or sack off whatever and just kind of be hungover all day. And then because I felt bad, I just go grab another crate in the afternoon with my friend. And I spoke to him recently, actually. We still speak a lot. And I remember the first time I said to him, "Oh, I've stopped drinking." I didn't know if you know this, but I've got a drinking problem. He's like, "Of course I know you had a drinking problem." Like, he was like, "There was never a time in our friendship where you weren't drunk, like, unless I had to drive somewhere, you know." Um, so yeah, so I think I think the term functioning is really appropriate because it takes it away from, oh, I'm drinking at parties, or even if I'm drinking 2-3 times a week, people do that and genuinely don't have a problem. They just like to go out and whatever. But when you're creating a schedule of it and creating a way to lie to people around it, it doesn't matter, because I think people like myself and you and any kind of addict, we're very good at convincing other people around us, but we're mainly really good at convincing ourselves that there's no problem. um, I think it takes a certain amount of not not intelligence, and not in a, again, not in a in any kind of like cocky or arrogant way, but it takes a certain level of kind of like thought process to think about how you're going to basically dictate what your brain's telling you. Because if you just kind of let it all go and went, I've got a problem with this, blah blah blah, it makes it so much harder to deal with. And I have friends who are functioning alcoholics now who have spoken to me about the problems that they have and they can't stop. And that's so much kind of like, that is so much braver, I think. Because as soon as I realized I had a proper problem, I stopped. Kind of like, I tried about 6 or 7 times over 6 months, but within that 6 months, I'd stopped. Some of these people who have that issue and can't stop, I think there's no fun in it anymore, and it literally is just function. You know, it's like putting petrol in a car. Um,
Yeah.
and
I really get that, what you're saying about how you adapt your life around booze, because I used to do that, you know. I used to get in from work. I would never have a drink if I had a phone call to make or I had to go anywhere. It had to be on my terms, that actually I could just know that once I had one, I could just let rip, you
yeah,
know. Even if I was to go to the pub, I wouldn't have pre-drinks. I would go to the pub because I wanted to be clear-headed when I walk in and walk out, go home and get absolutely sloshed. But people in the pub didn't know I had the problem I did have. So I can really relate to that online sort of diary you got in your head of how you go on stage and you'd be okay with 6 cans, but if you had 8, it might be different.
yeah, yeah. That was, I mean, and that was all when I felt like that I had it relatively under. I mean, I had it under control. I think at that point it was a problem, but I had controlled how the image of it came across. And I think part of the reason that I did have it under such control is because it was almost like you had to fit a brief to be someone that drank a lot from where I was from. And it's just working class area in the northwest of England. Like, there's nothing special about like, oh, I've had this incredibly hard this and this. It's just, there had to be, if you were one of the lads who was playing, playing a lot of football and going out and getting in fights and all that stuff. And those were the people that were, oh, it's cool for them to drink. But when I was drinking, I I was walking around school in cowboy boots and makeup. Like, it was almost like it wasn't taken seriously that I would do that type of thing. So I almost thought, okay, it became more of a friend to me, because I was like, well, this is more personal. This is bigger than image. This is
Mm.
bigger than those people who go and drink in the street. You know, when you see photos, it's so funny when you see photos of like teenagers who've had their first ever beer and they like hold it up to the camera
Yeah.
when they take the photos, like, look what I've got, kind of thing. It was already more to me than that. Um, and I think that's why I created a function out of it, because it became such an emotional kind of such an emotional comfort to me, that if I created this function and set amount of rules, like you said, that it's almost like, oh yeah, no, I've got this under control. It's not just I need this constantly. And I think people think that, I don't know about you, but if you say to yourself, oh, well, I'm not going to drink because I've got this important thing to do, you're like, well, how can I be an alcoholic? You know,
Yeah. It's
if I,
denial because, I'll tell you another thing, that if ever, which was rare, I had to drive in the evening or do something, it didn't bother me. And it was like, how can I be an alcoholic if I can drive and go out and not even think about drinking? But it's all part of the denial. And I remember sometimes I used to play five-a-side on a Thursday night at 9, and the amount of times I think, do you know what, I'm going to try and get out of it so I can have a drink. And I didn't. I play 9 till 10, come home, and then start drinking. And that's where it ramped up. So 18 years old, you was drinking. I mean, to be honest, mate, that cocktail of beers and Baileys doesn't really do it for me. I mean, that's unusual. But when from 18 years old, how did things develop from there?
well, from 18, so when I was 19, I moved away. But between 18 and 19, I was going out with someone. I had a long-term partner who, I in my head, I knew that we'd be 200 miles away from each other in 6 months or so. And there would be, it's almost like this is going to be pointless being together. So to get through that, we would drink a lot. And I was just thinking about some of the stuff that I used to drink when I was with her. And it was almost like we did that stuff to numb out the fact that the relationship was going to end. And it's so strange because I feel like, because I had to flick a switch at 7 and grow up, whilst still trying to retain this facade of everything's fine and I'm just a little kid, whatever. Like, it was almost like, oh, we were having a normal teenage relationship, but under the surface it was like we were a really unhappy couple that had been together for 30, 40 years. And it feels like there was this I think one of the reasons I managed to stop so early, and it is because I had almost embodied someone that was so much older than I should have been. And so yeah, so me and her would drink a lot, and she kind of did it to facilitate the mood of us still pretending everything was fine. And then I moved away, and that's when it like really started, because I was on my own. Like, I would have the mentality of, oh, I don't have to go home tonight and see my family so I can get as drunk as I want. I had that every day. And I lived with 8 other people who had the same mentality. And we had house parties that shut down this entire university block we were in. And I had like nights out that I ended up playing football with someone at 3 a.m. on a football pitch in Fulham after going out on a night out in the centre of London. I, me and my friend tried to, we broke, there was like a TARDIS in someone's house. And we climbed over this fence and broke into this house, and got into this like TARDIS inside this person's house. And this guy came out and chased us down the street and then set up CCTV on this road. We had like, we used to, there's just so many, at the point I'm putting these like almost these like childish memories out, is it because there's so many people, addicts or not, that can relate to that stuff and go, oh, I did that, oh, I did that, I did that. And again, it was just about coercing myself to the extent that the only thing I'm doing is having fun. And it might seem like for the last minute or so that it's like, oh, has he missed his point? Why is he talking about all those fun things? It's like, because that's the whole idea, is that I'm very, very good at making other people believe that I'm just having a good time, and all of those things with those other people around me having the same mentality as me. That was great, because I could just feed off, all right, it's 8 people in a room. You only need 7, because if you got 7, then you've got one person to go out with each night. And then everyone's like you said before, oh, I'll just go out and have one, leave the pub pretty sober, so people think they ain't got an issue. If someone gave me a call and went, oh, what you up to tonight? I'd be like, oh, I'm not free. I could do something tomorrow. They'd be like, oh, he's not drinking tonight. It was like, no, I was just drinking with someone else. And yeah, at 19, myself and a friend counted that we got we got absolutely like blackout drunk every day for, I think we counted 48 days. Some of my friends might message me and tell me it was a different amount, but I don't know. I was drunk. There was like, yeah, about 48 days. The only reason it stopped was because I went on holiday with my family for a week. Um, and again, because I'd gone on holiday, I was 19. I was just like, yeah, I don't need to drink much when I'm here. Like, I'm fine. There's no issue. And then got back and it was Christmas. And then, to be perfectly honest, that time from 18 to 22, 19 to 22 was just pretty much carnage constantly. But under the guise of, it's all just at university, you know. And it became a slightly more of a hidden thing. I got into quite an abusive relationship. And within that time, I did a lot of just drinking on my own. And at that point, my self-confidence was so low, I didn't even care. That was when it kind of like started to fall off to the point where I didn't care what it looked like to other people. I was like, I just need this, and that's it. Yeah, and that's pretty much how I stayed. I kind of I straightened myself out for my last ever university performance that I had to do. We had a gig, and I was like, oh, I'll have coffee tonight instead of drinking. Because I know I got an exam at 9 a.m. and then that's me done at university. And again, I was like, how can I be an alcoholic because everyone else is drinking and I'm not, kind of thing. Yeah, and then that's so that 19 to 22 kind of was to the same level of severity, I would say.
It's interesting because I was my old brain box was ticking over to think when I was that age, and you kind of, I remember several times I thought, God, I'm really caning it here. I used to get in at 3, 4 in the morning and get up for work the next day. And at that age, I don't know what it is, but you just got a second wind when you get up. And I think that's what helps you think, it's all right, I crack on. And, you know, and also at that age, you're encouraged a lot by your friends, aren't you? Come on, let's go on the lash. And if you've got a problem with booze, it doesn't take long for you to go, sod it. Even if you've thought to yourself, do you know what, I'm going to take it easy for a few days. It takes one of them to go, we're going out tonight at the local, mate, you come in? And you go, fuck it. You know?
Yeah. What's strange, I think, about that as well is that if you're in an environment where that doesn't really change, then those questions from other people about, are you going to come out and stuff like that, they remain pretty much consistently prevalent to the point where you stop. I know people that, to be honest, won't listen to this, and I could talk about them and give their full names and say all of this stuff and say how bad of an influence that person is and stuff like that. But one, that wouldn't be right to do. And two, I know that they've got issues that they haven't addressed. But because of that, those people kept me going, because when there's a couple of you, then it's perfect, because you know, and I could spot it, and those people, they either can't spot it or they don't want to spot it. Like, so 22, 23, normally for people that would maybe have a more structured or normal career would possibly, you know, have families and stuff like that quite a lot earlier. Whereas because a lot of the people that I was friends with were either working in bars or were in like creative industries, we never grow up. I've still not grown up at all. But because of that, you're able to just every week kind of think of the same excuses, because you're not, well, it's like, well, I don't have to go and do anything inherently responsible tomorrow. I just got to pull pints. So why not stay up till 5? Like, there was a time where my other friend, who's now sober as well, we had we'd finished working at this pub, and we would normally sit around and have about 4 or 5 pints every night, just because the work was so hard. And then crack on the next day, do the same thing. And I remember once we stayed up until, I think we stayed up until 8:45, went upstairs, fell asleep for 15 minutes and started the next shift. And I think I cried on that shift twice. It was horrible. I just remember passing out on the floor, and there was just like a toilet roll, and I just used that as a pillow. 15 minutes,
God.
straight back up, and then straight back down to the bar. But yeah, if you're in that environment, there's almost no not that there's no need to stop, but there isn't a way to stop. If you're literally pouring out the thing that is the problem, like it's right in front of you.
It's really hard, mate. But the thing is, I talk to loads of people, and they, do you know, the most common thing people say is, "I'm in an industry that drink is wherever you look," and you know, I often say to them, "Well, look, nearly everyone, because you justify it as well. You know, no
100%.
matter what you do." I was in the like carpet game and whatever, and it was always like, well, you know, we graft, we work really hard, so you got to have a few beers after work, and you got to go out at the weekend to go on the lad. You know, there's always an excuse.
Yeah.
So, you know, still very young in that. Where did it get to a point in your life that you thought, do you know what? I really need to change this.
So I was living in a I was living in a house with my best mate, and we were having it was pretty good. We were going out and drinking a lot, but again, we'd kind of like managed to reel it into being just really fun a lot, because both of us, we would have a really great time. Then we had someone else move into that house who dramatically kind of changed everything, and it was that point where I was like, I cannot function like this anymore. He brought in It was this guy who moved in, a very sociopathic person who pretended he was really cool and all this and really nice and whatever. And he was just a horrible, horrible person. And he would have 4 or 5 people round every night, just caning drugs all night. And I wasn't really in that kind of, for me, it was almost like, well, I'm just drinking, so I'm better than this kind of thing. And then that was brilliant, because I had this kind of barometer of kind of like, oh, well, I'm a socially responsible human being who only has a legal drug kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, but I was working out in, so the band I was in at the time, we were on tour a lot. But when I wasn't on tour, I was teaching guitar up in Watford, which was about an hour away from where I was. It wasn't a very good job, but it was any money I could kind of grab whilst I wasn't on tour. But I had to leave the house really, really early every day, and they would be up, like the music would be so loud 5, 6 days a week, that I would just have to drink to kind of get myself to sleep at that point. And I was just like, I'm not even doing this for fun. Like, if those people weren't in the house, there'd obviously be another excuse, but I was like, I wouldn't even be drinking. So it was just kind of like latching onto anything. It was like, oh, that's the new thing, that's the excuse kind of thing. It's almost like, when they have those like things in cartoons, and they have like people like falling between two kind of like cliff faces, and their
Yeah.
hands are
Yeah.
stuck on either side. It's like, the further down you go, you just grab another excuse to hold yourself
Yeah.
up. And that's how that kind of felt. And I remember one day waking up and going, oh, I really need a beer. And my mate literally just walked past me in the living room and went, yeah, it's because you're an alcoholic. And I was just like, oh, okay. I didn't stop me, but I went, oh, okay. I mean, no, I'm not. Let's go out and have a drink. Like, I was just like, I don't, there's no need to almost like call that out. It's like, that's a bit harsh. No, I'm not. And it was when I got myself out of that house that um, I started to think that I would think that I'd stop, kind of thing. And once I got out, the thought that this was going to happen, it kind of changed. But for a very brief moment in time, I thought, this is where this needs to change. And it wasn't until 2 years later where it actually did, because I got myself out of that, got myself into a new situation, and then, as you said before, whatever industry you're in, when I went from the pub industry solely to the music industry, that's when it just became another excuse. And be on tour with the band that I was in at the time was very classic rock music based, and I would drink to kind of get through that, because I didn't really like the music. But also, we were on tour with a lot of bands whose like whole image was like, oh, let's get wasted kind of thing. So it was another reason that it felt impossible to stop at that time. But there was a few occasions where we were out in Italy one night, and I looked down at my phone. My phone died. I looked up, all the boys had gone, and I was so drunk. And at the time, I was trying to raise money to do like a go sober thing in September whilst I was out on tour, to raise money for whatever it was I was trying to raise money for. I completely sacked that in like 2 days into the tour. And at this point, I was setting up all of these like sober goals that I could try to achieve as a way to not drink. Because I thought, wouldn't that be a good achievement? I need to not do this forever. I think if you have in your mind that there's going to be a time where you start drinking again,
Yeah.
you go, well, what's the point?
Yeah.
Why stop for 4 days when I'm going to be back on it in 5, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was a lot of battles over from 24 to 26. There was a lot of battles of, I'm doing this for a good cause to stop, or I don't care, this is just what I'm going to be like, or complete denial of everything's kind of fine. And then there was the few moments where I break down, especially with like lack of sleep and stuff, and where I would just kind of like bawl my eyes out and be like, there is something going on that I don't have any control over. Like, I really felt like there was I'd go to the pub and in my head I'd be like, I know that if I have a beer, this is me for 3 days. I never got to kind of experience a hangover without drinking on top of it, really. At this point, it was just 3 days on the session, and when my body literally couldn't take it anymore, I just kind of pass out for a few days.
Oh, it's scary, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so weird.
And talking to so many people, we've all got different stories, and when you started this at the beginning, saying, we've all got these sort of hero stories of, you waking up and your head's on a toilet roll. I remember walking through a park, absolutely gone, probably 3 in the morning, right? I had someone's painting under my arm that I'd just taken it off the wall because I thought that looked nice in my house. And then I laid down on the grass because it looked like a beautiful green suede snooker table base, and I thought, I can just sleep now. When I woke up, it was chucking it down, and it was in the middle of a muddy football pitch, and it was like, what was I hallucinating or whatever, and the painting was over there somewhere where I dropped it, and it's like, God, I've got a million stories, but it all ends up the same. That when you realise actually that it's providing nothing in your life, you soon realise actually I've really got to do something about this.
Yeah, 100%. It was, I think, it's absolute nail on the head with it's when there is no positive with it anymore, and you can't. I think you get too tired to make up positives. You're like, this isn't true. Like, it doesn't matter what I say about this, and it doesn't matter that it's 100 times easier than not drinking. It just isn't true, and nothing's, it's not working. Like, I would go. I remember there was an occasion where I stole a painting from a pub as well. Actually, I got barred from a Weatherspoons for it, and it was nailed into the wall. The nails were like 6-7 inches like into the wall. I just ripped it off the wall and kind of turned around to my mate and went, oh yeah, so the guys to fit the new one will be in tomorrow, thinking I duped everyone in the pub to thinking I was like a painting remover. Obviously I got barred.
I wonder if they put 7-inch nails in, because before they used 2-inch nails and everyone was like, no.
Mate, it's the worst thing is that it was this pub in West London, and it was a Weatherspoon, so yeah, it wasn't fantastic. But the painting on the wall was upside down, and we used to go into that pub after uni every day, and I used to look at that painting and be really annoyed that it was upside down. So one day I thought, oh, I've had enough. I'm going to rip this off the wall and bring it home. And then the next day, I woke up and it was just in the middle of the living room, and I was just like, well, I'm not 18. Like, what's the benefit of that? Not that I should have done it at 18, but you know what I mean? I'm like, this is embarrassing now.
Yeah. So, day one, how did that come about? How old was you
when I stopped?
Yeah.
Let's think. 26, I think it was 26. It's been 4 years and 8 months, so I think that's 26 it was. And do you know what the thing is that I went to the pub, and I walked to the pub. I picked up a pint from my mate that was working. I went and sat in the beer garden, just sat in the beer garden, rolled up a cigarette. I was like, right, I'm gonna. And then something in me just went, like, I broke down. I just started crying in the pub. And the person I was sat with, I was like, looked across at her, and I was just like, I can't do this anymore. And I sat there for a few hours just crying. I didn't move the beer because I didn't think I'd stopped drinking. I was just like, oh, this is going to be another one of those things where I kind of break down and whatever. Pay for the drink, just left it on the side. And then I walked down the road to pick up my house keys from my friend, because I was like absolutely bawling my eyes out kind of thing. I was like, I need to go home. I don't know what I'm doing. Went into the pub down the road, And I was like, this is the first and hardest test I will ever have. And the guy on the bar was like, oh, your mate's outside, but he said you have to buy a beer before you come out into the garden. And I was like, nah, just leave me alone. And I went out into the garden. And my mate was like, oh, you can get a pint. I was just like, just shut up and give me the house keys. I need to go, kind of thing. That was the first day. That was it. It was the night before. There's a video of me the night before as well, I think. In my head, everyone was like drinking the same as me. Woke up, I had a crate in my room that I was drinking separately to the crate I was drinking downstairs because other people weren't drinking fast enough, kind of thing. That next day I thought I was going to be getting straight back on it. So it wasn't one of these like biblical moments that I thought that was going to happen in my head where there was some kind of, like in those things in films, I think, where people stop and it's so dramatic and stuff. It's like I had a few tears in a pub garden. No one looked at me. I went and picked up my house keys and went to bed. Like there isn't this massive dramatic moment where everything changes. It's just you're never ready to stop ever because you're literally addicted to the thing. I think people wait for it to stop being addictive and they go, oh, this will get easier at some point. It's like, it's the hardest thing I've ever done.
I think you're underclubbing that, mate, because when you talked about that, and I'm sure the listeners will agree, it sounded incredibly powerful because it was like a breakdown, like an absolute breakdown. And the same for me. I didn't plan it, but all I kept saying was, I've got to do something about it. I've got to do something about this internal dialogue. And to a lot of people, it seemed like my first day was spontaneous sobriety, which is a thing. It's where you just give up out of nowhere. But it wasn't, because there was a lot of spontaneous dialogue that had been going on previously to that subliminally telling myself, I've got to stop drinking, mate. It was that. And it was on the 7th of Jan 2019. I got a text message, and a lot of people know this story. And that changed everything. A bit like you going into the pub garden and sitting there. I think it was whatever you believe in, the universe, God, or whatever it was, but something happened at that moment that's enough for you, Jack.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I think it's almost like you'd need 100. It's like you almost need 100 little reasons to stop, and maybe someone's kind of teetering on the edge of like 99 of those reasons. And there was just something in my head that went, oh, I've stopped because I'm hungover. I've stopped because of this. And that's not why it is at all. You stopped because there's been so many instances that, like you say, that eventually make up this one thing that stops it. And the more over the last few months, I've been looking into a lot of things where it's never really one big move or one big moment that helps something become great or good or whatever it is. There's loads of tiny little details within anything that make that happen. Like when people talk about having gut instinct,
Yeah.
I firmly believe that gut instinct just comes from the fact that every single time you've tried a certain thing, it's gone either positively or negatively. And because of those experiences, if you have an idea and immediately you think, I've got a bad feeling about that, it's not because of some kind of zany made up thing. It's because you have subconsciously experienced that 100 times and that probably won't work out. And then people go, oh, I just went with my gut, kind of thing. It's like, well, you're just going with your experiences,
Yeah, but I mean, I'm a believer of your gut instinct. It's an actual chemical reaction as well, because your gut is your second brain.
Yeah.
And when you really read into that, it's really fascinating. But I'm not qualified to talk about it. But all I can say is that there's such a tie. That's why they call it your second brain, and I'm a true believer in that. So how did you find the first few months? Was that really difficult for you because of your industry?
Yeah. So the first couple of weeks was okay, and then I went back out on tour. And going back on tour was it was a very refreshing experience, because I knew that at this time I was in a band that I wasn't that happy with, and I'd had some great moments in that band, all whilst I was drinking. And after the fact that I'd stopped, it was the shows were more enjoyable, but at the same time more frustrating. And we played some festivals, and there's videos of me on YouTube and of me being in front of thousands of people, being so angry and so frustrated because the sheen of me stopping had that's the sheen of the alcohol had kind of gone off, and I was like, oh, I think I can do better than this in like any career. You know, for example, if you said you were painting your wall, if you were doing that when you were drunk, you probably think this is great, like the beautiful grass you lay on. The next day you're like, oh, it's rubbish. Like it's the same thing. I was like, oh, this is really good, and I stopped and I went, oh, I've just been hiding behind my insecurities because of the alcohol. Like they weren't there, now they are here. I came up with this really strange analogy, as it's almost like, you know, when a little kid's got like head lice, and it's the equivalent of whenever people ask me what it's like to stop drinking, I always think it's like someone shaving your head, and all of these things that are buried beneath all this stuff are exposed, and they've got nowhere to go, and they just need to you need to then get them off of your head, and you can see them a lot clearer, and it's really disgusting. But it's something that's been like buried there for ages. And that's, for me, when I stopped, I was so angry for so long, and I'd smash guitars up on stage and stuff, not even in a cool, oh, this is rock and roll way. I was just so sick of what I was doing, the people that were around me. The drummer of that band is one of my best friends, and he's now in the band that is our career now. But everything else around that was, I couldn't tolerate it anymore. And I realized that I'd never tolerated it sober. It was just because of what was happening. So I went out and played some very frustrating kind of like shows and stuff. And then that was the anger kind of kept me going, because I just think it's almost like grief. I've been, I can't remember what the exact phrase is, or who it was by. I think it might be, is it Marion Keyes or someone that basically said like, oh, like alcohol was like, it's almost like your best friend. And it's almost like when it goes away, it's almost like mourning the loss of a friend, you know. And that's how I felt. Like I went through stages of
grieving.
Yeah, completely.
Grieving and anger as well, because like I can really relate to that, because I had this anger going on for a couple of years, and I was angry with myself as well, that everything else in my life I was managing apart from alcohol, and I was angry that I had let it into my life so much, and it had dominated so much of my life as well. So yeah, I can really relate to that.
It became, I think, situations that were around me. When it stopped being so, when everything stopped feeling so against me, and everything, like I start to feel a lot less angry about stuff. I think I just realized that a huge part of this was to do with issues that in myself that I'd never kind of dealt with, and problems with my mental health that I'd never dealt with at all, and traumas from when you're younger, because everyone to an extent has things like that they either suppress or kind of get through, and I think a lot of the time it's almost like somebody's personality makeup, I suppose. You know, it's almost, people can deal with these things in a very healthy way without realizing they're being healthy, or people can be very self-destructive without realizing they're being self-destructive. And I think there was so many things that I would internalize in the same way that you said, like I would turn things into myself and be really angry at myself that I hadn't gotten better at this certain thing in music, or I hadn't, like, why am I playing this music when I could have been doing this and this if I'd been sober this whole time? And it's almost like you're fighting to get the years back that you kind of lost from all of, well, I'd say lost, because you forget so much stuff. Like you genuinely do. There's so many times I woke up and I was like, oh, what did I do? That is such a terrifying thing to feel 3 times a week, you know, to be like, I have no idea what happened yesterday.
I know, mate. But do you know what? I'm a firm believer that we're here now in the present, right? We can't go back. And this has all happened to you for a reason. And you're in this creative industry. And I'm sure that all of that happened to you then comes out in your music now.
Yeah.
And you're young, you're 31 years old, even though you look 12. But seriously, you know, I drank for 40 years, mate. So for me to look back at my life and look at the mistakes I've made, the relationships that I've affected by my drinking, my relationship with my son, my stepkids now, my wife, and that, if I was to sit down and think about all that now, I would literally, I don't know what I would do, but I wouldn't be here doing what I'm doing now if it wasn't for that. So,
Yeah.
and I'm here in the present, I think with you as well, you know, like talking to you today is really refreshing, and you've been really honest, mate, and I appreciate it.
Mm. Cool, man. I mean, I've been really excited about doing it. I found, I think one of the main things that I think anyone that's listening that thinks that they might have a problem would need to hear is that it's not that the alcohol is the problem. The alcohol or the drugs are the solution, I think. And I think they are your best friend, and they are your therapist, and they're your escape from things that are just really hard to deal with. Like I've been battling with bad mental health for pretty much the entire time I've been drinking without almost realizing it. I take medication for that now. I meditate, obviously sober. I exercise, and I think all of those things together, it's almost like I do those things just to feel mildly normal. I don't do those things to become this Zen
Yeah.
guru master of enlightenment. It's just like I do that stuff so I can function like the guy next door who's just normal, like normal in quotes, I suppose. I think there are a lot of tendencies that people have to blame everything on their lack of control. And if you put that aside, there's probably 100 different things that have happened that have made you need to reach for that stuff, you know? Um, it's it's never that you are a terrible person. I think people put it down to a bad personality. As I said at the start, it's almost like an image that you have to be an addict. I think o- out of the people I know, addicts are the nicest, most open, wonderful people that I have ever met. And it's because they share so much. I think there is such a huge amount of empathy
Mm,
and compassion from people that are like that, because they're very in tune with the fact that life is hard and they need something to use to cope with that. I think that's why
mm,
people call it using, because you're picking something up and using it to, it's a very positive word. It's not you're not, I'm going out and I'm destroying alcohol, I'm doing this, or we're getting obliterated. You know, when people say all of that stuff when they're just going out on a big session or whatever, people that need that stuff and are addicted to it say that they're using it because it just helps them to function. And I think all
yeah.
of these words intertwine. They don't just come out for no reason. As again, because I'm a musician and because I'm a singer, right? I'm really obsessed with how language fits into little, like almost these subconscious nuances that people talk about, and looking at all of those things and analyzing it and verbalizing it, it makes it so obvious. um
I hear that. I mean, I think it's interesting that when you found your coping strategies before of how you used to have a certain amount of alcohol before a gig and then after, you know, it's all a routine. And it's when you stop drinking, you have to find a new routine, don't you? You
yeah,
have to find a coping strategy that is outside a drug. And that can be really, really difficult. So you've got your music, and trust me, we'll talk about your band before we wrap it up, but it's brilliant, mate. Honestly, it's fantastic. And I'm an old doddering git, and if I walked into your concert now, I'll be thrown out. But um, you know, but it's, you know, there's a void left when you stop.
yeah,
And what you say now is how you cope is by your meditation.
yeah,
um but you know, you say that you take medication as well, and we all do things. You know, I've got a PT now, and you know, that's really helped my mental health, but I've struggled all my life with mental health, you know, all
yeah.
my life. And
Mm.
my comfort blanket was alcohol. It's never gambling, it was never sex, it was never drugs, really. I never really got into drugs. It was always alcohol because it did what it said on the tin. It
Yeah,
numbed out. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
And for me, after 40 years, it was to remove that was really difficult. But what I've found from it is now I've put in place these other things. I'm now in a good place, and I don't need to go back to that toxic relationship.
yeah, yeah. It is a very, it's so synonymous with any kind of toxic relationship. I think one with another human being. It's so it embodies its own personality. I think alcohol, and it's its own person within our society, because if you think about the amount of, I saw one of the Instagram pictures you had up the other day where there's just like a really nice looking pub outside. There's like every other thing, especially here, and like every other building is is a pub, you know. And I think there is such incredible marketing behind alcohol,
Mhm.
and there is this sense of, I think there's a sense of experience that is sold to you that isn't sold to you with things like drugs, and stuff like that. And I think whoever the evil people are that are doing that now with gambling are turning gambling into the same experience that
Mm,
alcohol was, you know,
mm.
with all of those constant advertisements that came out during lockdown, which I just think, how can you sleep at night? You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I
And that,
mean, I know there's I won't mention his name, but he's a famous actor, South London actor in a lot of the gangster films and whatever, and he does adverts on roulette and stuff,
yeah,
and gambling companies and stuff, and it's like, mate, you really don't need to be doing this. You
no,
must
not
be
at
a
all.
multi-millionaire now. What are you doing? You know,
Mm,
and I know as well with some people, not me, luckily, but with alcohol comes gambling, you know, online roulette and stuff like that. I know someone who's done 2, 3 grand in one sitting because he'd had a drink, you know, and it's
wow.
stuff like that that, you know, it escalates. But I just feel so grateful. And what you say as well about addicts being incredibly humble, I've always said that, Jack, that
Yeah,
talking to you, like we've chatted on the phone and whatever, but talking to you now, I feel like I've known you for years. Do you know what I mean?
same. Yeah.
It's really lovely. And everyone I meet in this community, or whether it's because they feel like they've got a second life or whatever it is, but they're so humble and they got so much empathy for others and whatever that, and they've been through their own turmoil as well, their own internal turmoil that we've had. You know, I've often said it's like being on a desert island. We might perform in front of our friends and our families. Yeah, I come across all confident and I've got my shit together. But actually, you're in your bedroom on your own thinking, what have I done with my life? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
It's
it's a fascinating subject, but I'm going to start winding it down now, Jack. And I could honestly talk to you forever. But I'd love you to tell me about now. What's happening for you now? How has it changed you? How's it changed the lyrics in your songs? And you know, tell me all about that, mate.
it's been, I would say, over the last 2 years, it's been amazing. It is the idea of stopping and all of those problems seem so small to me now because of how positive things are. I stopped, and pretty much as soon as I stopped, I did one tour in my last band, and then I quit. And it was a huge it was a huge risk. And I started up something else. And the first song I wrote, with our keyboard player Ben, me and him were in a band together when we were a lot younger, and we got together and went, oh, we were like, let's just write something that we think will kind of like hit home. And we wrote something in this flat with a friend, and we didn't really know what's going to happen. And then we took that song to this BBC event, and we kind of snuck in the artist's area, and handed this. We handed a USB stick with a playing card attached to it. I still got all the other 51 in a bag over there. We just wrote our band information on it and gave the USB stick in, and to these people that were playing music. And Steve Lamacq played our song on Radio 6 in front of like 300 people. And this woman came up to me afterwards and handed me a business card and went, call me. And I thought I was in trouble because I've just been in trouble for years. Anyone doing any business, I was like, I'm in trouble, I'm in debt or whatever. I gave her a call, and she was like, the song that we played, 3 record labels were there. All 3 of them were like, this is okay, whatever. And I was like, oh, okay, thanks. Had like my arse handed to me in front of 300 people. um, and she was like, I thought your music was incredible. And then we signed a management deal 7 weeks after being a band. And I I rang Ben. It was just myself and him at the time. The guy who the guy who plays bass for us now was the tour manager for my old band, and we've been friends for years. And I asked him to join, and he said no. And I did the same with our drummer. I asked him to join, he said no. And then the second time around, we'd done a few more little bits here and there, and they were like, "Now let's give this a go. Let's do this properly." And our manager's had this kind of like, she's an incredible woman, and she's had these plans in place that are starting to kind of like come into fruition now, that she said would take as long as they have taken. And we have this incredible team of people around us, that make me feel really kind of like safe, that I don't need to drink. Or the other guys in the band drink and stuff like that, but I'm so close to them as people that it doesn't matter. And I would always say, if you're in any kind of industry, you can teach a nice person to do a good job, but you can't teach someone who's amazing at something to be a nice person. So if you're working with anybody that you don't really get on with, you can't sustain that, you know.
Yeah.
And it's just gone from strength to strength. The band itself, Tova, Tova. I need to put that in there at some point.
Plug it, mate. Plug it.
Yeah. We have seen a massive growth in the band over the last 6 months because of all the things that me and you talk about here. I put that into all of the lyrics of the music we create. The EP that we put out 2 months ago is called Happy Music for Sad People. And I think we wanted to give it quite a childish name because it's got, rather than it be too like overbearing. And all of the music within those 4 songs is about expressing problems with like alcohol and mental health, with the ideas of the imagery of like demons and monsters and stuff like that. I really wanted to take away the idea of having it set in the real world, because that's what I did with my alcohol. I would take myself away from the real world and put myself somewhere else. I was like, I'm going to do that, but with these songs. So it kind of creates this thing that fits with, we've got these other 2 songs called Head Count and You Look Better as Demons, and they all fit, these 6 songs all kind of fit together in this world that we've kind of created from the experiences that I've had with addiction. And we did a show a couple of weeks ago, which we put it on sale and it sold out in 2 weeks. We have a show on April the 2nd, O2 in Islington. You can come, you won't be kicked out, I promise. And that's already like half the tickets of that for sold out, and all that stuff is it's just coming from the fact that the music is so genuine. And when people say you have to be in the music industry and take drugs and drink alcohol to like have this image, it's like we are trying to completely counteract that and say that I'm bisexual, I am sober, I am like vehemently feminist, I don't believe that anyone should be treated in any kind of way lesser than you, simply because of who they are. And I feel that comes across in what we do and how we perform, and that's why it's grown into the success it has over the last year, because what we do is so genuine that all it takes is for someone to come across it and they go, oh, I can relate to this. I don't know how I can relate to this right now, but I can. And that's why it started. That's why I started it. It was to cope. I got I tried to go in like an NHS course thing, and I completely mucked it up. And they sent me a letter saying, unfortunately, we can't have you on this course, kind of thing. And in my head, that's when I left what I did previously and went, this is where this changes, because I need to do something that creates a community of people that can sit there and feel safe. You know, like we've because of the virus, the tour we did was then a year and a half later. Now we've started playing shows again, because we haven't done loads and loads of stuff over that time. I thought, well, you know, if I was still drinking, I would be doing nothing until we got back on the road. But we've leapfrogged so many bands that have kind of been complacent, because every single day I haven't had I'm hungover, I'm this and this. Like, I've made hundreds of songs that are all kind of not that they'll be used, but it's practice, and every single thing that we do gets better and better, because there's so much stuff that goes in between. We release a song this month, we release a song 6 months time or whatever. There have been hundreds of songs in between that, and that's all come from the drive that I have from being sober, and well, from my ADHD as well, where I just like hyperfixate on things. But it's incredible, man. It's been doing this, it's the one you know, when people say that kind of like, oh, it's like the thing that they were born to do, like Tova and this community of people we've created, with the community we've created for these people. That's what I feel I was born to do, and I couldn't have done any of it without being sober at all.
And this is a point, mate, what I was saying to you earlier about regretting the past, right? You wouldn't be where you are right here and now talking to me if it wasn't for that.
Yeah.
Vice versa. And that's the way I look at it. And for me, I'm like you, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be right now. Absolutely. And Jack, again, I could talk to you for hours. I'm going to wrap it up. We'll have to catch up soon together, mate.
Yeah.
I think you're amazing. I'm
Thank
really
you so
proud
much.
of you as well. I know we've been chatting. And keep doing what you're doing, mate. And you might see me with my old Zimmer frame at the back of the hall in April at your gig, waving it around. Thank you so much, Jack. And I'm going to put all your details in the show notes for anyone listening that wants to follow your band. Your music's amazing, mate. Honestly,
Thank you so much.
And let's catch up soon.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Cheers, man. Thank you.
Cheers, my man.
Bye, mate.
Bye.